After the Trilateral Summit, Prime Minister BINYAMIN Netanyahu gave an exclusive interview to Charles Gibson of ABC News, using the opportunity to explain Israeli settlement policy.
President Obama has said that for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to move forward, the construction of Israeli settlements in the West Bank has got to stop. The Palestinians have made that a precondition for talks. So this afternoon I spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and I asked him whether he would offer any kind of a freeze on settlements to get the peace process started again.
I think the issue of settlements is something that belongs to the final negotiations. It can't prejudge the negotiations. It can't be resolved before we even begin to talk about it. The issue of the settlements has to be resolved. It should be resolved at the end of negotiations, not before the negotiations.
But, Mr. Prime Minister, are you saying unequivocally you will not offer any kind of a freeze, limited, full, any kind of a freeze on settlements as a precondition to talks?
There are 250,000 people living in these communities. They need kindergartens, they need schools, they need health clinics. They're living. I'm committed not to build new settlements. I'm committed not to expropriate additional land for existing settlements. But people have to live. You can't freeze life. So there is a way, I think, to relaunch the peace process and not get bogged down with this question, because we just wasted 6 months on this issue.
So former Israeli Prime Minister, the great Abba Eban, used to say about the Palestinians, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. If you take this position on settlements, aren't you missing an opportunity?
Charlie, I set no preconditions on the beginning of negotiations. I said I'm willing to go anywhere, any place to meet any Arab leader. First of all, the Palestinian leaders to move towards peace. And I think Mahmoud Abbas has a great choice to make. We all do. But he has to decide. Is he going to be an Arafat or an Anwar Sadat? If he's an Anwar Sadat, he'll find in me a partner for peace, and we'll make peace.
Mr. Prime Minister, just a couple of questions, if I may, on Iran. Our intelligence services, your intelligence services, struggle with the issue of how close they are to having nuclear weapons and how close they are to delivering them. How close do you think they are?
They're getting closer. There's no question about that.
And what does that mean? The Iran government that right now is in turmoil, does that make them more dangerous or less?
To have the Ayatollah regime acquire nuclear weapons, no matter how weak they are today, tomorrow they'll be a hell of a lot stronger. And that is something that would threaten the peace of the world. It should not be allowed to happen.
You say they are close in your mind. Is there a point where it becomes impossible for Israel to live in the shadow of a nuclear Iran?
Charlie, I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals. Of course, every country reserves the right of self-defense, and Israel is no exception. But as I'm pointing out today, the development of nuclear weapons by Iran would pose an enormous problem to the stability of the Middle East, to the flow of oil from the Middle East, to the security of my country, to the possibility of having terrorists enjoy a nuclear umbrella or receiving actually nuclear weapons from this Iranian regime. There's so many reasons, endless reasons, why this should not be allowed to happen, and it's time the international community acted in unison to make sure that it doesn't happen.
A relatively low-key Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, said that the United States should view his country as a potential friend and not a threat. Speaking to the Associated Press in New York ahead of his address to the UN General Assembly, Ahmadinejad said that he expects free and open discussion at a meeting next week with the 6 world powers, although he continued to insist his country will not negotiate its disputed nuclear program. Ahmadinejad then went on to again question the reality of the Holocaust.
And remind you that Mr. Obama is not the first president here that believes Iran is a threat.
فکر می‌کنم شما توصیه کنید تاریخ مطالعه کنن و سرنوشت اون کسانی که اینجوری فکر می‌کردن رو بررسی کنید.
We would appreciate if he could advise him to revisit history and read it again to see what the fate is of viewing these problems from this perspective.
ما فکر می‌کنیم هر کس با ایران دوستی کرد به نفعش.
Historically, whoever made friends with Iran saw a lot of opportunities.
Meanwhile, anti-Ahmadinejad protesters lined the streets of New York while projecting images of anti-government protests following disputed Iranian presidential elections in June. The demonstrators continue to insist that the vote was fraudulent and that Ahmadinejad is not the legitimate Iranian president.
We have audio of voices from Iran, inside Iran. Iranians actually in their own home recorded messages that say in Farsi and in English, Ahmadinejad is not my president. So the idea tonight is to actually become the vessels for the Iranians. What you see is their images, what you hear is their voices.